As Sarah carried a tray of drinks through the opulent dining room of the luxury cruise ship, she froze mid-step, her heart pounding. There, seated at a table across the room, was a face she'd never expected to see again. A man who was supposed to be dead for the past 7 years. Her husband, the father of her children, living a new life with someone else. In an instant, 7 years of heartbreak, sacrifice, and survival crashed back into her mind. She had mourned him, struggled under the weight of his debts, and raised their children alone. But now, here he was, alive and carefree. As Sarah fought to steady herself, one thing became clear. She needed answers, and she wasn't leaving without them. Sarah hadn't felt such peace in years. Her life had been simple but fulfilling. She and her husband, Michael, lived in a modest home in the suburbs, sharing quiet days and dreams of a family. When Sarah found out she was pregnant with twins, joy overflowed in their small house. She could hardly contain her excitement, and Michael's face had lit up with pure happiness when she shared the news. They spent their days imagining the future, decorating a nursery, and laughing about all the adventures they would soon have as a family. For Sarah, life felt perfect. But then, one evening, Sarah's world was turned upside down. Michael had gone out for a few errands. She was home, resting her hands on her belly and dreaming of their future together when the phone rang. It was a call that would haunt her for years. "Mrs. Thompson," the voice on the other end said, cold and official. "There's been an accident." The details blurred together. Michael's car had gone off the road. The authorities searched, but the river's strong currents had swept away his vehicle, leaving no trace of his body. Michael was simply gone. In an instant, Sarah's dreams of a family with him evaporated, replaced by a crushing emptiness. The days after the accident were a blur. Family and friends tried to comfort her, but Sarah felt adrift, alone, and utterly lost. She mourned her husband, mourned the life they'd planned together, and somehow, through her grief, she found the strength to move forward. She had to, for her unborn twins. But the world hadn't finished with her yet. Not long after Michael's disappearance, another storm hit. A stranger came to her door one evening, a stern-faced man with a voice like ice. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I'm here to collect the debt your husband owed." Sarah could barely believe her ears. She'd had no idea that Michael owed anyone anything substantial, let alone a debt of this size. But the man was unmoved. "Your husband took out loans," he said, his voice as calm as if discussing the weather. "Now it's up to you to pay them back." Alone, with a mountain of debt and 2 babies on the way, Sarah felt trapped, suffocated by the burden Michael had left behind. As her belly grew, so did the number of letters, phone calls, and visits from the creditors. No amount of pleading or explanation could sway them. To them, she was just another debtor, someone who needed to pay. The stress was unbearable. Yet, somehow, she made it through. When Jacob and Lily were born, Sarah felt a surge of strength she hadn't known was possible. These children were her light, her reason to keep going. She took on any work she could find, juggling multiple jobs, cleaning houses, working long nights at diners, all while raising her twins. The days were a relentless cycle of exhaustion, yet Jacob and Lily's laughter became her lifeline. For 7 years, Sarah fought to survive, but her struggle wasn't over. In a last-ditch effort to finally free herself from the debt that shadowed her life, Sarah accepted a job as a waitress on a luxury cruise. It was hard, grueling work, but it offered decent pay. If she could save enough, maybe, just maybe, she could finally see an end to her nightmare. But on the 4th day of the cruise, while serving drinks to a group of guests in the high-end dining room, Sarah felt her heart stop. At a table across the room sat a man who looked exactly like Michael. The resemblance was uncanny, the same dark hair, the same laugh. For a moment, Sarah wondered if her mind was playing tricks on her. But no, there he was, alive, dressed in a fine suit, laughing alongside a beautiful woman. Sarah's heart pounded, her mind raced. How was this possible? Michael had died 7 years ago, leaving her and the children to fend for themselves. He couldn't be here. It didn't make any sense. Shaking, Sarah managed to finish her shift, her mind spiraling. She couldn't ignore it. She had to confront him, to know the truth. That evening, Sarah waited outside the restaurant, watching as the man she had once loved left with the other woman on his arm. Summoning all her courage, Sarah stepped forward, blocking his path. "Michael," she whispered, her voice shaking. The man froze, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition, of guilt even, but then his face turned cold, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice detached, as if she were a stranger. Sarah's heart ached. "Don't pretend you don't know me," she said, her voice cracking. "After everything, you can't pretend. You know who I am." The woman beside him looked confused, glancing between them. "Michael, what's going on?" she asked. Michael's face hardened. "I don't know who you think I am," he said coldly. "But you're mistaken." And with that, he walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone, devastated and filled with fury. Sarah barely slept that night. Her mind churned with anger and betrayal, years of grief and hardship bubbling to the surface. Michael was alive. He had faked his death, left her to struggle under his debt, and disappeared to live a new life of luxury. She knew she had to find answers, but she also knew she had to be smart. Confronting him had gotten her nowhere. Instead, Sarah devised a plan. The next morning, she began gathering information. She tracked his whereabouts on the ship, confirmed his new identity, and even learned the name of the woman he was with. Claudia, his new wife. With her heart pounding, Sarah used her access as a staff member to collect every bit of evidence she could find. She had spent 7 years suffering for Michael's mistakes, and she was not going to let him escape without facing the consequences. With proof in hand, Sarah reached out to the debt collectors who had tormented her all those years. She laid out the information, explaining that Michael, the man they had pursued her for, was alive and hiding under a new name. The debt was his to repay, not hers. In exchange for the evidence, she demanded her own freedom and a guarantee of safety for her children. It was a bold move, but Sarah knew it was her only chance. The debt collectors were skeptical at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. They agreed to release Sarah from her obligations and to go after Michael instead. As the conversation ended, Sarah hung up the phone, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on her shoulders began to lift. That night, as Sarah worked her shift, she kept her head down, waiting, wondering if her plan had worked. Hours passed in tense anticipation. Then suddenly, she saw a flurry of activity on the main deck. Security guards were approaching the VIP suites, and she knew this was it. From a distance, Sarah watched as the guards escorted Michael from his suite. His expression was one of shock and anger, but as his gaze swept the crowd, he saw her standing there. She could feel the weight of his stare, the recognition dawning on his face. He knew this was her doing, that she had finally turned the tables on him. As they led him away, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: anger, sorrow, satisfaction. The man she had once loved had become a stranger, and now he would face the consequences of his choices. Michael was gone, and with him, the debt and the fear that had haunted her life. Returning home to her children was like stepping into a new world. For so long, Sarah had been consumed by survival, by the weight of debt and betrayal, but now she was free. She could focus on Jacob and Lily, on giving them a future that wasn't overshadowed by fear. Each day Sarah found herself laughing more, playing with her children, and cherishing the simple moments that life offered. The past 7 years had left scars, but they had also shown her the strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced unimaginable hardship, and yet here she was, finally free. As she tucked her children into bed each night, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had fought, she had survived, and now she was ready to build a new life, a life of her choosing. The past was behind her, and the future stretched out, filled with promise. For Sarah, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where she was in control, where she and her children could finally live without the shadow of betrayal. And as she closed her eyes each night, she knew that she had won her freedom, not just from the man who had abandoned her, but from the fear that had once ruled her life. Sarah's journey was filled with heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately, a hard-won freedom. She fought through betrayal, reclaimed her strength, and built a new life for her children and herself. Have you ever faced a moment where life forced you to find strength you didn't know you had? Share your story in the comments, and let's connect through these shared journeys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for more powerful stories of resilience and redemption.